I hope you enjoyed the first in the McLaren Vale Grenache mini-series. Next up, we've got Giles Cooke MW from Thistledown Wines. I went to the Revenir winemaking facility tucked away in the Adelaide Hills that Giles shares with a number of other producers. And I talked to him about two things. One, the terroir of McLaren Vale and the deep sands that make up Blewitt Springs area. And secondly, whole bunch, what this does to the wine in the glass and what we can expect from the wines over the long term. I'm here with Giles of Thistledown, and I've got questions for you, Giles, because I have just recently included your incredible Sounds of Time Grenache in a video that I did about McLaren Vale Grenache, and I wanted to ask you about two things.
Okay.
One, terroir in McLaren Vale, and two, whole bunch, because it's something that I haven't talked about yet, and it's very important to the style that's been proliferated in the region.
Yeah, pretty fundamental. So the terroir, dealing with that first. McLaren Vale's incredibly diverse. It's got one of the most diverse geologies of any wine region in the world, and the McLaren Vale have done a brilliant job of mapping an awful lot of that. It's incredibly complex for most people to come to terms with. But when you're looking at our Grenaches, the vast majority of them come from very sandy soils. And that's one of the defining characteristics of the Blewitt Springs sub-region of McLaren Vale. It's not officially a sub-region, but we kind of...
An area.
Yeah, we kind of call it. And it's defined by... it's got a little bit more altitude than the rest of McLaren Vale. It's not high by standards of really high altitude regions, but it's just enough to kind of catch the cooling breezes coming in from Gulf of St Vincent. So that allows for a longer ripening period. And then the other really defining characteristic of Blewitt Springs is the deep sands. And Grenache loves deep sands for lots of reasons. One is kind of vine health, it's free draining, it's phylloxera free. But also Grenache has got quite thin skins, and it doesn't like direct sunlight on it. It tends to get sunburn, which can develop some more kind of diesely characteristics in the actual wines. So we want to avoid that. You want kind of dappled light over the bunches. But the great thing about sand is that on bush vines with the bunches hanging down is you get that reflected heat coming back up off the sand, and that allows for sort of very gentle ripening. You don't get that sunburn, and you get really healthy bunches.
Does that extend overnight, that kind of soft reflection of heat, or does the heat drain out of the sand pretty quickly?
It doesn't hold it. When you're thinking about some of the other great Grenache regions of the world, like Châteauneuf-du-Pape, and you think of the Galley, the big puzzle stones that you have there, they hold heat an awful lot more than sand does. I think it tends to cool down a lot more, but it certainly works in terms of that kind of reflected sunlight.
I think I've just led you into the thing that I was hoping you would say, and that is, yes, it does cool down overnight, and that's helpful for this beautiful, lively acid that we see in the wines. They're very, very fine.
Yeah, and that's because of the elevation as well. You're getting those cooling breezes coming in at night, and that, rather than some of the lower areas, but that cooling just allows the vines to actually relax a little bit at night, and you get that longer season, and which leads to more kind of complex, pretty flavours, I think, as well.
That's evident in the wines. I'm finding it left, right and centre. It's very exciting. Tell us about, we've got to skip to whole bunch. I'm just conscious of the time. Tell me about whole bunch in these wines, because it's something that I don't talk about necessarily when I'm talking about the way that they taste, but of course it's directly relatable to the tannins and to the shape of the wines.
Yeah, I think shape is incredibly important, because Grenache, I think the history of Grenache has been about wines that can be a little bit too big and too broad, and it's very easy for that to happen in Australia, where you've normally got abundant sunlight and heat, although not so much in the last couple of vintages. So for us, with whole bunch, it's not so much a matter of if, but how much. So pretty much all of our wines have some whole bunch, and for me that whole bunch is almost like the scaffolding. It provides that structure for the wines, and it gives the wines real kind of focus, so that even as the wines age, they've still got lovely definition to them, and they don't kind of blow out and become too sweet. And in cooler areas, in Northern Hemisphere, they often talk about you only use whole bunch in really warm years when it's very ripe, but in Australia, we're trying to frame the wines. We're trying to restrain that ripeness so that we get balance and delicacy and texture. And for me, whole bunch is about providing that. It is like that sort of scaffolding to keep everything upright and pointing in the right direction.
I find sometimes when wines have a really high proportion of whole bunch, they can really the tannins can really encase the fruit like a cage or a skeleton, and it takes oxygen to crack that open. They need decanting, and I feel like the evolution of a wine with high proportion of whole bunch really is dependent on the oxygen you give it early. It needs to open. Yeah. But I find that these wines are very supple and pliable and elegant, and the whole bunch is really it really helps to kind of smash the tannins into the fruit. It's like smithereens rather than a firm web. So it makes them very pleasurable, very, very pleasurable. And has that got to do, I think, with the ripeness that you're picking these at? I mean, there's no green characters in these wines whatsoever.
There's no green characters as such, but I think what we want is more about forming that kind of structure of the wines and providing them with crunch and with and with balance and form. But we don't really want that character to come through. If I hadn't told you there was lots of whole bunch and all
Correct.
Of these, you may not have known there was any.
Yeah.
Because what we don't want to come across is that kind of very green, tobacco-y, weedy sort of character. And if you push the boundaries too far, that's what you get. And that's as bad as being overripe. What we want is balance. So I would hope that what this has done is made these wines more balanced, more pleasurable, much more relevant, I think, in terms of when you would drink them, who you would drink them with, and how you would drink them. So I'm not looking for them to be overtly stemmy. Great winemaking should be about balance, I think, and integration. And whereas old style Australian Grenache used to be slightly kind of caricature. It was big, it was sweet fruit, it was made in the sort of the mould of Shiraz. Yeah. Whereas actually what we're trying to do now is prettier, more floral, more aromatic wines. Just with that, all of that sort of whole bunch actually integrating into it to make these wines crunchy, delicious, things that you just want to drink. And
just to finalise this, because I'm really pleased that you are speaking to me like this, because this is exactly what I wanted. We've just done a 5 vintage vertical of the Sands of Time Grenache, so 21, 20, 19, 18, 17, and it was fascinating to see the way that the fruit morphs over that time. And I think when we start talking about whole bunch, we can see that tannic structure and that scaffolding and that skeleton persists through the wines, and it's the fruit that moves around it, and you really get this, they morph from luminescent and spicy and lifted to kind of bloody and ferrous, but very, very fine, rose petals and oregano and great, great delicious things. All of it around this very consistent framework of very fine tannins. So I'm looking forward to seeing this again in 5 years' time when we have 10 wines to look at.
Yeah, it's great to do this. It's not often we get an opportunity to taste all of these wines together. And it's so important that we're doing it because this is a relatively new style of Grenache. So it's kind of tracking its evolution and being able to just check certain things is a great opportunity to do it. So.
Well, I'm very grateful. I'm a grateful recipient. Thank you. Thanks, Giles.
It's been great. Thank you.
Thanks.